Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Zoom session. I'm so glad you were able to join us. And today I brought a very special guest, a lady whom I haven't met yet in person, but I can see they're a very dear friend, Monique Boonstra. She is a designer, and Monique is designer of Minagami. And at some point of my life, I'm going to learn how to pronounce it properly. So just bear with me. It's like it might, somehow I manage to pronounce it differently every single time I say it. So just, you know what I'm talking about. So Monique was a designer of that pattern. And it's a perfect pattern for beginners of Shetland lace because it's the same repeat, it's symmetrical, it's easy to understand the direction of the stitches. It's also at some point becomes easy to memorize, and it prepares you for any Shetland lace pattern out there, basically. So I want to start with asking Monique if you can please unmute yourself, first of all, and then tell us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for this pattern. What was your inspiration for this pattern? Talk about it. Tell us about it. Can you?
Yeah, okay. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I am very interested in Japanese culture, very normally, but before I was a knitwear designer, I was a garden designer, and I was already interested in how Japanese gardens were made, and I applied the rules that they had to my designing. So it was only logical for me to do sort of the same thing. And besides the fact that very many Japanese people are wearing Shetland wool sweaters, and there are also some Japanese designers making Shetland designs. So I thought I'd be digging in the history, and I have some tattoos that come from Japanese prints, block prints. I have from Hokusai. I have some tattoos on my arms and on my back. And at some point, I came across the story of a turtle, and that was rescued, and it had seaweed on its back because it was living for such a long time, and it was very wise, and it rescued the princess. And well, the whole story is in the link in the pattern. And I have the tattoo on my arm here. And I'm also very fond of hexagons. So I thought it would be very, yeah, good match to make a hexagon designed shawl.
Well, when you did this design, did you have a particular audience in mind? Did you think about who you're making the shawl for?
Yeah, this time I did because usually when I design stuff, it is a lot of things happening at once. And I thought an all-over pattern, it's basically a diamond and a diamond and a diamond surrounded by hexagons. And I thought that would be very nice for the yarn that I was given. I was asked to make a design for a lady from Cocon Yarns, and she's also designing shawls for her yarn, and it's all this pattern has been also translated into Japanese.
Right. Tell us a little bit, like, and you and I talked about it, and if you guys haven't watched it, there is a few interviews with Monique, and one of them was the tips and tricks about Shetland lace. Let's talk a little bit about that. What have you learned, like, since you became Shetland lace knitter and designer? What did you learn that you always tell in your classes? Like, what's the most crucial tips that you have for Shetland lace?
On the one hand, that there are only a few stitch techniques. It's the knit, it's the purl, it's the yarn over, it's the decreases, and nothing more. There's no slip stitches, no return stitches, no. You can work a bit with color, but usually you don't, because the lace is so much work that usually you stick to one color to make the lace really come to life. And the thing that I learned is that there are so much possibilities. Even with a very simple repeat, you can have a great effect. And the yarns became finer and finer. And with the monogame, I discovered that even with a fuller yarn, you can still have a great Shetland patterned shawl and learn all the tricks and have a nice piece of lace. And I'm so happy that so many people are joining, because most of you will be working in a fine lace or a lace weight or a heavy lace weight, like 876 yards per 100 gram or 800 meters per 100 gram. And I'm knitting it in very fine needles. And I was doing that because I wanted to show that what I found in the fine Shetland lace group is that most people are often very impressed with the finer yarns and the effect that that has. And you are now learning to knit Shetland lace and with the fuller yarn. And I wanted to show that by making it in a finer yarn, that it's still the same techniques, and it's just maybe 3 or 4 steps down in needle size.
Right. Well, we talked about, I'm doing this series of interviews called Tips and Tricks of Becoming Better Knitter, and talked about that. So somebody asked me to ask you, if they're working now in fingering weight on monogamy, and then they're thinking about trying another pattern of yours, let's say Saint Ninian, what would be the best way to challenge themselves? Should they try thinner needles? Should they try thinner yarn or more difficult yarn, such as like silk? What's the best way to start challenging yourself? What would be your advice?
The absolute challenge would be gossamer silk, but I won't put you up to that, because that's something I would not very likely be using. But yeah, I would think maybe a bit finer yarn. So one step from the 876 yards is to go to 1,000 yards per 100 gram, or even 1,200. And then to the 1600, so you get to use one ply by Jamieson and Smith, the wool, the Supreme. And that means that you might need to adjust the needle size to 2.5 millimeters. And yeah, maybe a different color, because now you chose maybe a light color, so you can see the stitches better and see more what happens. And the thing is, with example for Saint Ninian, is that you'll be knitting 15 stitches together at once, but because the yarn is very fine, it's it should not be a problem.
Right. Another question, technical question, was in regards to Marvels of the Sunless Sea, but it applies to like every pattern of yours as well, you know, when there is an edging. What's the best way to pick up stitches from the edging to continue to the border? What's your recommendation?
Okay, there are several ways to do that. I haven't seen the pattern itself by Hazel Carter. I didn't buy it. Oh, maybe I did, but I haven't looked at it yet. When she decided to, if she has decided to knit the first stitch, then you will get a small bump. And if you use the slip one purlwise, then you have a nice loop on the side. And you can do either or, that's not a difference. But once you have decided on one technique, you have to keep it up on the side so that the distance between the stitches will be the same, and the way you pick up will be consequent, because when you block the shawl, it will stretch, and you don't want one bit to pull a bit longer with probably the slip one stitch purlwise than compared to the knit stitch, which has a little bump on the outside. If you pick that up, it will be a little bit tighter, but it still will be able to be picked up. And when this is my fabric, I pick the stitches up from behind and up. because that way they come onto the needle in the right way, like this. And when I turn the work and start knitting, I can pick it up and knit it perfectly.
Do you have a theory on how to choose a yarn for your project? Like what yarn gives better stitch definition, what yarn is more drapery? Like how do you just choose the yarn for your designs?
As many of you know, color is not often the first thing I choose, but for some it is, because sometimes I'm given a skein of yarn and have to make a pattern with it for a web shop or something. And sometimes I make a new design, and then I work very hard in my brain thinking of color combinations and making a swatch and see if it works. And yeah, as a designer, I think the quality and the color and the blend of the fibers of the yarn are very important, because, for instance, for the same minion, you want a yarn that shows off the shell and those loose loops that come together and shape the shell very well. And for monogame, I had a fuller yarn, so I had to make the pattern a bit larger so you don't get lost in small stitches and small patterns. And for recreation of the Shetland stars, that was so large. I had to go with a finer yarn, and preferably an original Shetland made yarn, because that is closest to the original as it was as in the pictures. And yeah, it depends on the type of pattern. If you make an all over, then you can go for a fuller yarn and a larger needle, and maybe a color that is a bit more variegated. And when the colors, the patterns are many, like in Blythe, then you have a more subtle yarn with less color variations, and yeah, like no fuss. It must be a smooth yarn so the lace can do its work and show off the patterns.
Well, let's talk the subject that we have opposite experiences with, but needles. Tell me your preference in needles and your relationship to circular needles in respect to Shetland lace.
Well, I was learning to knit on straight needles, and I've kept those, yeah, closest to me because that was the way I learned it. And I felt that when I was working on circular needles, I didn't get the same speed because it's floating in the air. The needles often weigh 4 or 5 grams when they are straight, and maybe even less when they are circular. But the wire between the circular needles is often very resistant.
Right.
And sometimes back in the early 2010, when the Adi needles, lace needles, were very popular, and especially in Europe where I am, there were not very many different needle brands were available. So they said you had to soak them in a little bit of warm water so the wire would get softer and would be plied easier. But with lace, the yarn is so fine and so light that it can't resist the resistance of the wire of the needles. So then Hia came, or Hia, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. And I was asked by Susan Crawford of the Shetland Project, her book with the Shetland patterns, and I was asked to sample knit her the camisole. It's a gray camisole, and that I did on the Hia needles. And once because it had to be knitted around with the elaborate fine, like the whoop, 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 whoop pattern. Anyway, and I did that, but once I had done the camisole, I went straight back to my straight needles. Having said all that, again, because I don't want to do it, doesn't mean it can't be done. It's your preference. It can be wood, it can be bamboo, it can be carbon, it can be anything you want. It can be straight, circular branches, what you like.
Well, Laura asked that a lot of Shetland knitters use the knitting belt.
Mhm.
Do you know if one was using knitting belt, what length of needles would be appropriate for lace?
Between 10 inches, 40 centimeters. Is that 10 inch? No, that's 24 inches. I'm not sure.
I'll ask
My
and Yunson, maybe like she's gonna know.
Yeah, my straight needles are 40 centimeters, and I have double pointed needles, which are also 40 centimeters. But the thing is, when your needles in your knitting belt are too short and your knitting belt is sitting around your waist, then you have to go down with your head to watch him, because the needles are shorter, you wear closer to your belly. So when the needles are a bit longer, then your knitting is a bit further away, and then your head doesn't have to go down all the way.
Right. When it comes to needles, what are important attributes of the needles for Shetland lace or for lace, for fine lace?
Oh, okay. Well, a couple of years ago, I think just before Corona, I found out that there was a lady that wrote a book about nubs, Nancy Bush.
Mhm.
And every time I gave a class, there were ladies who told their friends and told the shop, and oh, I read somewhere and I heard that lace only can be done on bamboo needles because they're coarse and blah blah blah. And I was thinking to myself, I'm knitting on metal needles. I have straight metal needles. They're gray and dull, not shiny. And I've been knitting lace since I was 16. I'm 53 now. So I thought it was a bit weird, but apparently the other day I was in a bookshop and I saw the book and I read it and bits, and I saw suddenly nicely written, best knitting needles for nubs are bamboo needles. And I got a bit angry. I thought, okay, I can see why that is, but not even the people in Estonia are knitting with bamboo needles, I think.
Right.
So if you want to sell bamboo needles, I would say use bamboo needles, but I'm not selling anything except patterns and sometimes a bit different. But I think you have to, and that's a very wide answer to give, but if you have needles that you feel comfortable with, like Lieke, Knit Pro, Prim, it's a Dutch brand, I think. What we have, Adi, Hia, Chaigu, Pony. I have pony needles too. I have my Lana Grossa needles myself. Do what you feel most comfortable with so you can concentrate on the technique. And technically, yes, metal needles are usually a bit slippery, especially the Hia and the Chaigu, because they're shiny and maybe the stitches fall off a bit quicker than compared to a bamboo needle. And bamboo needles are light and they bend a little bit because they're soft compared to metal needles, who also bend when they are very small. But please don't fixate on the type of needles. It depends on your budget, depends on experience, it might even depend on I see that most people who use circular needles are continental and use their left hand. And I'm using straight needles and I'm working with my right hand. So
Right.
there's no wrong way.
Well, let's talk about the importance of swatching. What can you learn from a swatch? And also, as a continuation to this question, when you decide you have, let's say, that beautiful yarn that you have right behind you, and you
Mhm,
decide for yourself what size needle you're going to use for that yarn. So you
mhm.
decide to swatch. What do you look in the swatch to decide to determine that size of the needles? What criterias?
The first thing that came to mind when you asked that was that what I said earlier about monogame, that the top ball is a mohair silk, and this is a merino. This is smooth, and this has fuzz. It's fuzzy. It has hair standing out, while this is twisted and nice and smooth. So for this, technically, I could use a smaller needle than for this, mainly because if this goes on a needle that's too small, like say 2 millimeters, 2.5, the fuzz is so much in the way that you can hardly see the pattern. If you do a sweater, or like they showed me in the shop, you use them together as one, then you can go larger. But it depends also, like I said, with monogame, on the size of the pattern. If you go very small, the first is not an option. Totally not. Then I would go to maximum, it says on the ball, nothing. Okay, that's smart. I wouldn't go up to 4 millimeters, because then even then you go make holes with holes, and that's not the point. When you make a sweater and use the doubles, then 4 millimeters is just starting size needle. So it depends on the size of the pattern that you want to make. And for instance, I would use this for monogame on a maybe a size 375, and I would use this for Marvels of the Shetland of the Sunless Seas, because this is smoother yarn, and in that shawl much more is happening in the pattern. The much more the flowers and the crab shapes or something I saw in the border that resembled that. So that needs to be smooth so you can see the pattern better.
Right. Well, you had that blog where you actually did a little demo where you used the same flower on different needles. You knitted the same motif on different
Yeah,
needles.
I think I did that for the Esha too.
Right. So when you look at that, right, like you look at 3 different examples of like tiny needles, medium-sized needles, a little bit larger needles, you look at that fabric, at that swatch. What components, what characteristics you're looking at, like what you're trying to decide?
Well, if I want to combine it again with monogame, there are bits that are like solid. That's just knit, and above is a knit, and under it is also a knit. So it's just a fabric that's knit. And then in the center, you get the double yarn overs with the knit and purl in the back. And then again, a bit of solid. And you have to think about how loose you want it to be, or to still maintain its shape and still feel like it's light and airy. You don't want to be very dense with it, because then it's hard work. Then you have to pull the needle through and hopefully when you make a decrease, you get both stitches. So yeah, it's also a bit dependent on your experience, because the other day I was giving a workshop and I was making a swatch, and it took me, for instance, 2 hours or so. So I thought, oh, exactly the great time. Then it leaves me time for explaining and showing stuff and telling people things and how to go about it. And yeah, then the workshop came and people took 3 hours to make it, because I forgot I had more experience and I am suddenly a quick knitter. So yeah, that was
I had another question that somebody asked. So when we use the markers and we're trying to have a lifeline, how do we make sure that we're not placing marker so it's getting stuck there permanent? Also, another to continue that same question is, do you have any tips on how to make it easier to pick up stitches from the lifeline if you made a mistake and you had to frog to the lifeline?
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if I told it in the other video, but when I make a lifeline, I I have my knitting needle and I pull down the fabric. Oh, hold on. Sorry, it's not Shetland lace. I have stitch markers here that are very, very small. Oh, yeah, those little metal rings. And when I use a lifeline, I pull down my fabric and I go with the needle and a thread through the stitches. And then I pull through the stitches until the last stitch before stitch marker. And then I just go around it and then continue with the next couple of stitches. So I go under, over, under. Okay. What you also can do is knit, and then when you think like this is the front and this is the back, so I need to knit back before I put in a lifeline. And then what I do is I take my needle and sewing thread and go through the first 3 stitches, and then I knit those stitches. Then I pull down, I go through the next couple of stitches, and then I knit those. Then you put in the lifeline every 5 stitches. So when you get close to them, there's a little bit more room, because now I have 105 stitches on the needle, or a bit more, and I can't do those at once, and because I have a straight needle. When you have a circular needle, you can shift it back to the wire, and then usually there's more room to put through the needle.
So about the picking up from the lifeline, do you have any tips how to make it easier to, like, if you frogged to the lifeline, how to make it easier?
Well, frogging is a skill on its own, because when I have my fabric and I've knitted it and people want to pull out the needle and pull, wind, pull. But that's not what I do. What I do is, I don't have a lifeline in this, but when I do, I lay it flat on the table, pull out the needle, and then lay my head on the tables like this, and then pull on the yarn, because I have more control. And the chance that when one stitch gets snatched, and especially with wool, because this is smooth yarn, it doesn't stick very much. But when I have wool, it might stick to the stitch below. And then when I pull very hard, I take that one too. And that's not a problem if it's above the lifeline. Yeah, okay. But when, for instance, like me, you don't have a lifeline and you still need to pull back a bit, then when you have it on the table, you have more control. What you do then is see where your needle point would have been on the side where the yarn is still attached to the knitting. Your working yarn, you start on the opposite side with a finer needle, like 2 sizes down, maybe even 3. And the hard thing is that when you're working on 2mm needles, it's getting harder and harder to get a size that is even smaller to pick them up. Because when you put the needle back in, you may borrow a bit of room from the next stitch, so that will get smaller, and you will never get the original needle back into that stitch, and then you need to frog another row. So what I usually do is pick up a smaller needle. This is a 3mm, and then I go to a 2mm or even 1.5 millimeters, and then I put back the stitches back on. And sometimes I miss one, then I secure it with a pin. And then even then, I always frog one more row back, because then all the stitches are aligned, facing the right way. I'm even with the lifeline, you do need to use a contrast color, and still check if everything is okay. And if there's a lifeline in, you can see that there's another color holding back that stitch. And even if you missed it, you don't have to go back, it's still there. And then when you knit, you can pick it up and see, oh, there it is.
Well, I want to talk to you, and we touched on that in our interview last time a little bit, but I had an interview yesterday with one of the participants of this knit along. And by the way, for those of you who joined later, I'm doing a series called Humans of Fiberchats, which is a series of mini interviews with you guys. And it's about 10 minutes each. And we talk about exactly the knit along. So we talk about what you find interesting, what you find difficult. So yesterday I had one of those interviews, and the lady is really struggling with monogamy. And the reason she's struggling is that sometimes she will miss a yarn over, or sometimes she will drop a yarn over, and it takes her time to realize that, right? And then she doesn't know how to fix it. So it came back to like my initial struggle with Shetland lace. I remember knitting Love Dark, and I remember asking a zillion questions and not understanding if it's the mistake in the pattern, if it's a mistake that I'm making. And I remember Anne telling me, just read your lace. And I said, well, it's easier said than done, but that was my light bulb moment when I understood that like I can actually stop, slow down, look at my knitting, see between the markers, check what I'm missing, right? And then it's much easier to fix things. Talk about your experience of, because you are the queen of reading lace, you can look at the lace shawl and you can figure out exact chart for it. So what would be your tips? How can people approach learning how to read their knitting?
Okay. Directions and yarn overs. That's the most important. Answering the first question, how to get a yarn over back. Technically, when you don't have to frog or return the entire row to just get that one yarn over, unless it needs to be a double yarn over. Technically, you can still knit the next row and then mark it where you think you might have missed one, and then pick it up in a return row. Just pick up the bar below the 2 stitches where yarn over should have been, because for one stitch it's okay and it will block out, and in the end it will work out. I do that many times. I think, oh, I missed one, whoop, I go down, I pick one up and I knit it, or I knit 2 together, or what else. So that's okay. You don't want to do that every repeat or every 2-3 stitches. It's not like you can knit an entire row and forget 5 yarn overs, because if you have that problem, then you need to go all the way back and start over, because then you're missing something in the reading the pattern. But when you want to read your knitting, I've just got the picture up. Oh, it blacks out. Okay.
If you just turn the brightness on that screen down,
Yeah,
then it can be seen here.
or maybe it's a different angle.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What you then I don't mess it up. It's a bit crooked, but I'm sure, because with Shetland lace, in this pattern, you go up over here all the way, up, and here, up. So these are fixed. These are staying in the same place. I'm a very mean girl, because what I did was put the stitch markers exactly where those knit 3 togethers are. And that means that you have to borrow one from before, or
No,
2, and then
that's actually not right. You put them into that double yarn over the vertical.
oh yeah, okay, yeah.
You're not
Well,
that bad.
still mean, because it's a new stitch for most, and it's not a very common one in other lace patterns. Anyway, this is going out, and this is going out, and by this row, that's the center also for this one, and then it's all going in. So when you have this on your needles, you have to see, you're seeing it for yourself. Is it going out or is it going in? And I believe Erika was having a very great time knitting, and was having 4 repeats or something, and then she forgot what she was, because she didn't count she wasn't forgetting how to count the repeats. And Yeah, then what you can do is, this is one repeat. So this is charted. That's why I gave this picture in a pattern, because this is one repeat. What you can also see is there's one half of this, and one half here, and one in the center. But it's much easier that these are complete from top to bottom, and from this top to this bottom. So this is one whole repeat. So when you have a shawl and you count 9, that means you have 4.5 repeats done.
Right.
And well, when you read your lace, it's you have the pattern on your paper or on your digital device, and there are yarn overs around a circle, and there are decreases that way and that way. When you at the end of the day and you forgot to make notes where you are, or the metal ruler on your board is slipped, or somebody bumped against it and it's all lost and it fell down or whatever, and you have no idea where you are, that's okay. Then you lay it out on the table flat, so you can see how many yarn overs are there from a certain point, because the double yarn overs are the easiest to count because they're very large and they're straight on top of each other. So by the end, it may be that there is a double loop on it, so that you're on a even row, right? Am I right? Yeah, okay. And there's for the monogamy, that's very simple. For the marvels of the Shetland, the Sunless Sea, that's a bit more difficult, but still the same rule applies. Lay it down flat on a dark surface if you're having light yarn, and try to see how many yarn overs you have made already, and then count them on the paper or on your digital device, and see how many there are or need to be done and in which direction they're going.
Okay, so Laura asked if using like smooth thread or even dental floss for lifeline would be helpful. Like what's your preferred thing to instill as a lifeline, to use as a lifeline?
Oh, almost anything. Embroidery silk. I've never used dental floss because sometimes it's not
You have to
sharp.
use unscented also, like, because otherwise there is some coating that can stay on the wool.
You'll be minty fresh forever. No, yeah, I have a very large stash, so I just grab something that's in the drawer next to me, and if it suits and it is the right color, then I'll use it. And sometimes you can, for the monogamy, you can also use a bit of
Yeah,
sock yarn.
unboxed dental floss is
Yeah.
what you can use. I usually just use the cotton thread that you sew with, or any, just make sure it's contrasting color and make sure that it's not very fuzzy. So it's like this with the yarn.
And the cotton is somewhat of the best choice because it's very strong. And in the way that lace yarn, when you pull on it, it breaks easily because it's so fine. And when you knit it, it's distributing the forces, so it can handle a lot more stretch and force, especially during blocking. But cotton has a short fiber, but it's usually a bit fuller, so it is stronger. It's like the oak tree of the forest. The beech is very thin and has a veneer, and the oak is very short, so it's a fuller fiber, a fuller yarn because the fibers are so short. And so the cotton yarn is stronger when you have a fuller yarn, and therefore could be easily used as a lifeline, and silk, of course.
Right.
You can sometimes you have those tatting silk balls. It's very fine. It is always almost a bright color, and yeah, you only use a yard and it's plenty.
Well, there is a very technical question, and I don't know in how much detail you'll be able to help, but when we knit regular Shetland lace, like the traditional construction shawl, right? Where the center, like where there is an edging, two borders, and a center. If you want to change the length of the center, like either to make it longer or shorter, is there a tip how to match the edging to it? How do you, where can you hide either extra few repeats? Like if it doesn't exactly align math-wise, how would you do it?
Okay. That is why I usually have the wrap and turn for the corners, because then you can continue the same pattern in a corner. And it doesn't matter if you start early or later, or that you have more repeats in the center or on sides, because then you can continue knitting until you are 7 stitches or 7 loops before you have to turn the corner, and it still will work out. And sometimes you need to fiddle a bit at the last corner because you have to make it, match with the first point you've made. The rule of thumb is that, excuse me. The rule of thumb is that you knit 2 rows, that gives 1 loop. And on the side of the shawl, yeah. Okay. 2 rows is 1 loop. Over here, those loops. Yeah. When you attach an edging to it, there's also 2 rows attaching to 1 loop. So that's the same ratio. So if you have a Marvel of the Shetland Seas, can you tell me how much a repeat is for the center?
I don't have the pattern with me.
Oh, okay. For instance, it's 24 stitches, or 24 rows. That will give you 12 loops. The edge was very like the Blight one, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that would mean that you have maybe 24 rows for the edge point. And so 24 rows is 12 loops. So the repeat of the center will match the repeat of the edge.
Yeah, somebody said it's 23 stitches per repeat.
Yeah, wide, but I need length in rows. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's basic. Yeah, it's 50 rows per repeat.
Oh, 50 rows. So that's 25 loops for so that's a reasonable repeat. Yeah, I think because the Minogame has also 50 rows for 1 repeat. So and it's worked in the finer yarn for the Marvels of the Sunless Sea. Yeah, I think you can do one, or when you have 2 more repeats, then you have 100 rows. I guess you can fit in 3 at least, and maybe 4 edge points.
But like if you needed, let's say because you took it down, right, by 1 repeat, let's say. So instead of,
yeah.
Like if you took 1 repeat of the center, or edit in 1 repeat, where would you hide those stitches? Like you would try to hide them in the corner, right? Like of the edging, the points of the edging. Like if
oh, you mean like if you want to continue the rows, is there an edge attached?
The problem with Marvels is that it's knitted like edging, bottom edging, border, half of the center panel, and then you do the same thing on the other side. And then
yeah, but is the edging attached to the sides while you're knitting the center or the bottom rows?
No, it's later after you're done with the.
Oh, okay. But the bottom edging is done.
Yeah.
And then you knit. I saw that on the internet. Yeah.
Right.
On Instagram.
So you knit to the center. So there is 2 identical panels with the bottom edging, border, and half of
yeah,
the.
okay. I will buy the pattern, I will make calculations, and I will put them online
Thank you.
for making it shorter or for
Yes.
making it
So
longer.
whoever asked that question, you can also either email Monique or DM Monique. And
Yeah, absolutely.
see if you
Because
can-
I can tell, but it's too technical. Because
Right.
like I did with the Queen Susan shawl, those calculations, you have to be very exact, because otherwise things will run out of hand and will be unnecessarily complicated to go into that right now.
Yeah, Laura, just email Monique and she can help you
Yeah.
out with these.
It can be done, of course it can be done, because it also depends on whether you need to is it the pattern, is a pattern construction, you make the edge, then you make the border, then you make a part of the center. Is it the purpose of the edge below that it will be pulled out to match the edge on the sides?
I don't have an answer to that question just because I haven't gotten there yet.
Okay, well, email me, I will make sure it will be online very soon.
Thank you.
With pictures and drawings anyway, so.
If
Okay.
any of you guys have any questions, please write them in the chat or raise your hand, you know, the reactions, and I'll let you to unmute yourself.
Look, this is what I mean. You start for the marvels of the sunless sea, you start with the edge. Then you pick up loops and you knit the border. That's going up. Right?
Right.
And then you knit a part of the center, you do that twice.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. And then you graft this to the other side.
So Diane said the center panel is not the same on both sides. The center panel has 5 different parts to it also. There is a corner part as well, and the bottom edging is straight. So there is a little corner side, and then there is
a corner mitered.
Diane, do you know? Can you just unmute yourself and you guys can talk?
I'm looking at the chart right now, and it's not something I've done before, actually. There is a section at the top of the center panel that is only worked on the second side. So the first center panel is actually shorter, has 4 different sections.
Yeah, okay.
And
that's
then the
because
top piece
some
that
patterns
comes.
maybe it might have to do something with direction of the patterns. That
If you were to try to make that center panel longer, you'd have to choose one of the sections that you wanted to repeat. For instance, the first section is bead diamond. The second one is flower and leaf. The third one is Shetland fern. The fourth one is dewdrop diamond or bird's eye. And then the fifth section is mesh diamond, only worked on the second half of the shawl. And the edging comes, or the edging, yeah, comes up the side as you're working. No, it doesn't. You've got to pick it up somehow. I'm not even sure yet. And the corner's crazy.
Well, we'll have something to work on.
I've never done one like this before.
I think the corner is mitered.
I think so too.
It has to be, because otherwise it won't match. It doesn't stretch enough to. I'm looking at. I'm searching for the pattern now, because when I have a picture, I can find it there. See what happens. There it is. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me see if I can find somebody who has placed a picture on Ravelry with full shawl.
Yeah, I haven't seen one yet. The other thing is the way that this pattern is written, there is no slip stitch on either side.
No, then you have
These-
the knit stitch from the first
Right,
stitch
and you pick
row
up
and
the
the end row.
bar in
and then-
between the two ridges.
Oh, that's not very nice.
Well,
Then you
it's
get-
not that bad, actually. That's how it was done on the bottom, and I thought the same thing. Oh, this is going to be awful, but it wasn't so awful.
Yeah, but does it when you pick up the bar between the first and the second stitch?
I don't know if you can even see this, but
Well, I can't see I can only see myself somehow, but anyway, that means
I
there
think-
will be when you pick up the bar between the first and the second stitch and then attach the border.
it
then
looks completely seamless to me, Monique. It's very odd. I've always done them with the slip stitch pickup, and this, it looks like you've knit the whole thing together.
Okay.
There's no discernible difference.
As long as it stretches enough, because the direction of the edge is in a length is parallel, but on top it's like this.
Yeah,
and
it doesn't have the same amount of give as a slip stitch edge would have.
No, because I saw one person in the Ravelry group who had knitted the first two borders already, and I saw a nice and wide border, but a very cramped edge, and I'm sure it will stretch out accordingly because it works in the pictures when it's blocked, but it looked very weird to me.
Well, the edge looks narrower than the first border piece to me as well on my knitting. And I think it's just because of the stitches used in the edge versus the stitches used in the first border. You
This
saw
is
my picture. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, and it's a very the border is so wide that there's very little room for the center. And I see what happens. They want to graft it so that it's mirrored all the way. That when you wear it, the patterns run into the same direction on both shoulders.
Right.
So that is why one half of the shawl, this has to be longer because that is the,
Yeah, because there's like one extra section for the center.
this has the mesh pattern and that's mirrored either way. See?
Right.
Right. There's 10 extra rows on that
Yeah.
second.
And after that, there are plain rows and those graft easier than
Yes.
a row pattern.
Yeah.
So when do you want to decrease, make the shawl shorter? Then you have to omit a pattern on either side. But because there are so many patterns, you said 5. I see.
There's 5 altogether.
Yeah.
There's
I see a
4 that are the
strawberry
same,
and-
and then the one that's the only on the one side. So it's
Yeah, yeah,
individual.
Of course, it can be done, but then you have to decide which to omit on both sides.
Or which one to do a second time if you want to make it longer.
Yeah. But then I would go for the double hole. I would go for this. It doesn't go very long. The bird's eye, the double yarn overs, diamond.
The bird's eye. You
Yeah,
would do the bird's eye twice?
I would do that in the center on either side of the mesh in the pattern. So you have.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah, that would work.
Let's we're gonna
Because-
take this discussion into the Ravelry because we
Oh, absolutely.
half
Yeah.
of-
Sorry, we're taking over that. Okay.
No, it's okay. Because the last thing want to mention is when you do the bird's eye diamonds, those are only used once on either side. And when you put them between the mesh on either side, that will balance it rightly.
Somebody just said that listening to sorry, you guys, she's glad that she's doing Minagami. And that's the beauty of this knit along, because
Yeah,
we all coming with different levels of experience and we all have questions about stuff, and different people can have different opinion also about the best solution for different situations. So that's like the beauty of this knit along. And please feel free to ask all these questions in Ravelry in the group. So if
But
you
can I go for 1 second and pick something up?
sure.
Yeah.
So if you guys are new to this video and you haven't seen yet what we're doing, so we started the knit along, and I'm gonna keep the Ravelry group going for the whole year. So if somebody wants to join it, it's not too late. If you guys who are here want to invite some friends to join us, please do so. And that's the beauty of this knit along. There is no deadline on it. There is no, it's absolutely embrace your pace. You're more than welcome to knit one pattern and learn as much as you can from one pattern or both patterns, like a lot of people doing. And it's more about building a community, finding new friends, having people to answer your questions, and hopefully becoming better knitters along the way, because that's my goal for this year, is to challenge myself, to meet new people, and to help all of us along the way to become better knitters. Go ahead, Monique.
Okay. I was so very honored to be part of this knit along, because it's always a good thing to make people want to learn more stuff, and especially for this. And Minogame is just like you chose a good pattern to get started with. And people are often scared or a bit intimidated by the delicacy of the yarns used in, for instance, for the Marvels of the Sunless Sea. So this is how weird I'm thinking. This is not to boast, but mainly to show you that when you're knitting on the Minogame and you're looking at the Marvels of the Sunless Sea as it will be too complicated for you, it is just 1 or 2 steps up, because this is my Minogame with gossamer yarn, and you're doing exactly the same thing, only with maybe a little bit fuller yarn. So please praise yourself for making it. And with knitting this, you are learning the same techniques as for the Marvels as the Sunless Sea. They're just in a different order. You're getting most of it over here, going out, going in, and double yarn overs. And the Marvels of the Sunless Sea is maybe a bit more busy and with finer yarn. But even when you're knitting it with a full yarn or with a fingering weight or whatever, the technique, once you have done it, and once you have 4 or 5 repeats and everything is going very well, you did it. You're doing it. You're doing very well, because then it's only 2 or 3 steps away for going for finer yarn and getting addicted and enjoying it and having results. So that makes me happy.
Well, I want to thank you, Monique, for being our guest speaker today and for answering so many questions. And I'm sure we all learned something. If you guys are interested in learning more about this yarn, so this is the yarn that Joshua from Blue Fiber Company dyed. These are the exclusive Fiberchats colors. I put the link in the chat. You can get 15% off of this yarn with using the promo code Fiberchats. And I'm gonna also put it in the description of this video for the people who watch it on YouTube, so you can get it as well. Please share your progress on social media. If you are on social media, use the Fiberchats KAL and Fiberchats hashtags for it. Please join Fine Shetland Lace group and post your progress there. I'm sure you can also ask. It's a brilliant group to ask any questions, any technical questions you might have, because there are people with like tons of experience there. They're like true experts in that group. A lot of people know what they're doing much better than I do. So that's a great resource for you. Also, if you are on Facebook, join Knitters Gonna Knit. It's a group that David van de Kemp, who is here and who is helping me with moderating today, and I organized a couple years ago, and we are at over 20,000 people. Mind blown. So many people join. So post there, post your progress pictures, invite friends to join, invite other people to join, like spread the word about that. And of course, if you're a fan of Fiberchats, which I hope you are because you're part of this knit along, consider subscribing to my channel and share the videos from this channel in your social media, or send it to a friend who you think might find it helpful. I want to thank all of you today for joining us. And I hope you're enjoying this knit along as much as I do. Thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you, everyone.